Hi guys, my name is Modi and welcome back to Modi Speaks. So every time tensions rise between the United States of America and Iran, a very familiar argument spreads online. People claim the entire conflict is really about Israel. Some even go further and claim that Israel somehow controls American foreign policy. But when you actually study the history of US and Iran relations, that explanation collapses almost immediately. The conflict between the United States and Iran is the result of decades of geopolitical tensions, historical events, ideological differences, and global power competition. Even commentators like Kaizen Asiedu, which is a person I respect, have pointed out that the relationship between these two countries is much deeper than the simplified narratives often shared online. And we're going to take a look at his short video explaining this. He got some parts of his video slightly wrong, but we're going to straighten it out in this commentary. So don't worry, here we go.
Because everybody knows the only reason we're having this war is because Israel wants it.
Come on. The only reason? I'm going to explain why the US is bombing Iran's government without mentioning Israel until the end. I don't know if this war is the right call, and we won't all agree with what's happening, but at least we can understand why. Iran wasn't always a place where women were forced to cover up, the government killed its own people, and kids sold kidneys for food. It used to be a thriving democracy. Then, Iran's prime minister tried to nationalize their oil to take it back from British corporations. The CIA and the Brits didn't like that. So in 1953, they helped overthrow him and replace him with the Shah, basically a king. The Shah was controversial. So in 1979, liberal college students led a revolution to overthrow him. What they hoped for was freedom. What they got was the Islamic Republic. The Republic executed thousands of political prisoners, including those students. In 1979, they held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. Night after night, they paraded our citizens on camera and tortured them off camera. We took that personally. Now, you need to understand this about the Islamic Republic. They aren't rational geopolitical actors. They are religious fanatics who welcome death. Their constitution lists their messiah, a figure who disappeared over 1,000 years ago, as head of state. They believe he will only come back at the end of the world. So that's what they want. That's why they fund Hamas and Hezbollah. That's why their terror network has launched attacks in Europe, Muslim countries, and killed Americans worldwide. For them, all roads lead to Armageddon. They aren't logical. They're ideological. And you can't negotiate someone out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into. For the last 2 decades, they've pursued 2 weapons to contest the West: nukes and terrorism. Obama got them to agree not to build nukes for 15 years in exchange for removing sanctions. But that gave them more money, which they gave to terrorists instead of their citizens. Then Trump removed the nuclear deal and put back sanctions. That gave them less money for terrorists, but pushed them toward nukes. You don't want war, but you also don't want them getting nukes, right? But how do you prevent the nukes without risking the war? And if they get the nukes, does war find you anyway? Do you keep playing nuclear poker and hope that they bluff for the next 20 years? Or do you flip the table? If you were the president, what would you do? And what would you realize about them if they tried to kill you, like they tried to kill Trump? Now, does Israel benefit from this? Sure. That's what happens when 2 countries share an enemy. You don't need to trust Israel to see that. Look, we're not saints. We're acting in our interests. But our interests and the Iranian people's interests are aligned.
Wonderful video by Kaizen, but like I said, he got something wrong in his assessment. One of the most frequently cited events in discussions about US-Iran tension is the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat. In many modern discussions, this event is often portrayed as a simple story. The CIA overthrew a democratically elected Iranian leader. But the historical reality is far more complicated than that simplified narrative, which is the same narrative that Kaizen Asiedu just repeated to all of us. The truth is that the CIA did not really overthrow any leader in Iran, let alone a so-called democratically elected one. The CIA only exaggerated their influence in Iran just to make them sound all-powerful and all-influential, when in fact they are not all of that. The CIA did not have the power to just swoop in and remove a prime minister and then install a Shah. First, it is important to understand that Mohammad Mossadegh was not elected through a direct popular vote. He was not democratically elected in the way that modern presidential systems operate. Iran at that time was a constitutional monarch, okay, where the Shah served as the head of state, and then the parliament, known as the Majlis, played a central role in government. Now, Mossadegh became the prime minister in 1951 after being nominated by the parliament and then formally appointed by the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Now, to understand the full context of this issue, you have to take a look at the full timeline, which brings us to what I call the forgotten beginning, the 1953 coup in Iran. One of the earliest and most controversial moments in US-Iranian relations happened in 1953. Now, the voice in this next video I'm going to play sounds more enigmatic than my voice, at least to my own ears. So I'm going to use it for better explanation. Take a listen.
Most Americans learn one simple story about Iran in 1953. The CIA overthrew the democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and reinstalled the Shah. This story is repeated across American politics, media, and culture. You hear it from politicians, you hear it from television commentators, across the political spectrum, and you see it reinforced through Hollywood, where the CIA is portrayed as decisive and in control. Together, these form the version most Americans accept. But this version leaves out important facts, not because the events were unclear, but because the CIA later misrepresented them, reducing a complex internal crisis into a simpler and more self-serving story. Mossadegh was a member of the National Front. He was not elected by popular vote. Iran was a constitutional monarchy. Like every prime minister before him, Mossadegh was appointed by the Shah after a parliamentary vote, not chosen in a national election. This matters for understanding what followed. It also matters for understanding what legal authority existed and what did not. Before becoming prime minister, Mossadegh publicly threatened the sitting prime minister, General Razmara, with death on the floor of parliament. Shortly afterward, Razmara was assassinated by an Islamist group that operated within a climate of radicalization and political protection. This cleared the path for Mossadegh to take office. That context is rarely mentioned in American retellings. During this period, Mossadegh framed Iran's oil struggle in broader ideological terms. In public statements, he spoke of Iran's oil as part of a wider Islamic cause. This language unsettled domestic opponents and foreign observers alike. By 1953, Iran was deeply unstable under Mossadegh's rule. Oil revenues had collapsed. The economy was failing. Street protests were constant. Political factions were openly fighting each other. Opposition to Mossadegh had grown so intense that he declared martial law in the final days of his government. Iran was not united behind Mossadegh or his vision. This is another part Americans rarely hear. In 1953, most Iranians still supported the monarchy and wanted Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi to remain the head of state. The Shah was widely seen, especially by the middle class and the military, as a symbol of stability in a collapsing system. By that point, Mossadegh no longer commanded broad national consensus. Even some of Mossadegh's closest allies began to doubt that he was the right person to remain in power and turned against him. Several later acknowledged that the crisis had gone too far, the constitutional system was breaking, and that the Shah's return was seen by many as the least chaotic option available. This internal loss of confidence mattered. At this point, the constitutional crisis deepened. After the democratically elected parliament refused to grant Mossadegh expanded emergency powers, he moved to dissolve parliament altogether through a controversial referendum. With the parliament dissolved, Iran entered a constitutional gap. Under Iran's constitution, when parliament was dissolved, the Shah retained the authority to dismiss and appoint an interim prime minister until new elections could be held. It was under this constitutional provision that the Shah issued the order removing Mossadegh in August 1953. This constitutional provision formed the legal basis for the Shah's action at the time. Now the CIA. The main American figure on the ground was Kermit Roosevelt Jr. His role was primarily advisory. He consulted with British intelligence, offered assessments, and discussed possible outcomes. When Mossadegh refused to step down after being legally dismissed on August 16th, Roosevelt considered his mission a failure. After that dismissal, the Shah, acting under his constitutional authority, ordered the Iranian military to restore control and enforce the removal. The chain of authority ran from the Shah to the Iranian military to events on the ground. The CIA did not command Iranian forces. After his dismissal, Mossadegh continued to govern without constitutional authority. What followed was not the overthrow of a sitting legal government, but the removal of a prime minister who refused to accept dismissal. The decisive actions were taken by Iranians and by elements of the military acting in the name of the constitutional order. The United States did not run the operation on the ground. What matters is what happened next. After returning to the United States, Roosevelt described the events as a successful CIA operation. When he later tried to publish his account, the CIA demanded extensive edits, over 100 changes. The agency was not merely protecting secrets, it was shaping how the story would be remembered. During the Cold War, it benefited the CIA to appear powerful and decisive. Media repeated the story, politicians repeated it. Over time, the CIA-centered version became the dominant American memory.
In the middle of the Cold War, the United States played a role in the overthrow of a democratically elected Iranian government.
But that version left out key realities. Iran was already divided. Mossadegh had lost support, even among allies. Many Iranians wanted the Shah back. The CIA initially helped in advisory capacity, and afterward it exaggerated its role, simplifying events and turning a complex internal crisis into a story of American control. What Americans inherited was not a full history, but a constructed one. Years later, even American officials acknowledged this distortion.
A more accurate and fuller picture of what happened in 1953 with Mossadegh. Mossadegh was not removed by the CIA. Mossadegh was removed by the religious establishment, the political leadership, and the military. The CIA was invited in on the first attempt, which failed. And after that, the CIA was no longer involved. And if you go and read the collected works of Ayatollah Khomeini, he talks about in 1953 and makes no reference to the CIA.
Brian Hook, a former senior U.S. official, openly stated that the CIA's narrative of 1953 was exaggerated and misleading.
Just pro tip, when the CIA tells you that a formerly classified information is now declassified information, that is your cue to know that there has been a lot of tampering with said information. So believe everything they tell you at your own peril, okay? Everything they tell you in this so-called declassified information, believe it at your own peril. Now, like most of us know, in 1979, the Islamic regime under the command of Ruhollah Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah, and the rest is what Iran is experiencing today. Now that you have the backstory, let us get into the main reason why the United States is at war with Iran. And mind you, it has absolutely nothing to do with Israel. Number one, the fanatical ideology of Iran under this Islamic regime. Now, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not called the Islamic Republic of Iran for nothing. Their name, Islamic Republic, is not just a name. It is a death cult prioritizing radical Shia Islam over everything. The mullahs that rule Iran care more about exporting their Islamic revolution, which includes funding global terror, than feeding their people or building a democracy. This Islamic regime have spent billions on weapons while Iranians, who are actually good, decent people, starve under the sanctions the Islamic regime brought on themselves. Human rights are non-existent. The women are forced into hijabs and beaten for protesting. Remember Mahsa Amini? Of course, you get the picture. They are jihadist-loving ideologies that promise a world where only Islam rules and so-called infidels like Christians in places like the United States of America will be wiped off the face of the planet. That is a big concern. Second, they are cowardly but very dangerous proxy wars. At the heart of Iran's threat is its masterful use of proxy wars to wage asymmetric wars without direct accountability. Iran has poured billions and billions into arming, training, and funding terrorist groups like Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and various Shiite militias in Iraq. These are not mere insurgencies. They form a deliberate terrorist organization designed to undermine the United States of America's interests and those of its allies. Iran supplies these proxies with advanced weaponry, ammunition, and financial support, enabling attacks on American troops, shipping lanes, and civilian targets, all while Iran hides under plausible deniability. Consider the Houthis disrupting in the Red Sea, where they have targeted commercial vessels, or Hezbollah's rockets barrages that have destabilized Lebanon and threatened broader conflicts. In Iraq, Iranian-backed militias have launched strikes on U.S. bases, killing American personnel and perpetuating cycles of violence. This strategy is not defensive. It is offensive expansionism, allowing Iran to project power from Yemen to Syria without committing its own forces in Mars. Now, this danger is amplified by Iran's ideological zeal, a theocratic regime that brainwashes its operatives with a radical interpretation of Shia Islam, viewing the US as the great Satan, chanting death to America, and prioritizing jihad over diplomacy. Now, left unchecked, this network could escalate into coordinated attacks on US assets worldwide, turning regional skirmishes into global crises. Disrupting this proxy apparatus through targeted action is not aggression, okay? It is a necessary counter to a regime that thrives on chaos. Another reason, the nuclear shadow, a ticking time bomb. Even more alarming is Iran's uranium enrichment program, which edges perilously close to weapons-grade levels, despite international sanctions and strikes on its facilities even back in 2025. Iran has amassed significant stockpiles of highly enriched uranium, enough to fuel multiple nuclear devices if further processed. The regime's facilities at Natanz, Fordo, and Esfahan have been sites of clandestine activity, with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, reporting ongoing violations and limited access for inspections. Okay? Imagine an Islamic Republic armed with nuclear weapons, a state that calls itself such for a reason, Islamic Republic, placing religious dogma over human rights or rational deterrence. Imagine arming them with nuclear weapons. Iran's leaders have repeatedly threatened to wipe countries like Israel off the face of the map, and I'm sure they're not going to stop with Israel. And they view nuclear capability as divine right. It is part of their jihad. Now, this isn't a hyperbole. The regime's pursuit of nuclear weapons dates back decades, halted temporarily by diplomatic pressure. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, signed under President Obama and Biden, was a flawed deal that lifted sanctions and provided Iran with billions in frozen assets, which it funneled into its military and proxies rather than economic relief for its people. Now, thankfully, President Donald Trump cancelled this stupid deal, slowing their funding and, destroying their plans somehow. Yet, even after US-Israeli strikes in 2025 set back the program by years, Iran persists in building, defying IAEA oversight. Now, a nuclear-armed Iran would embolden its aggression, risking a Middle East arms race and catastrophic escalation. Other countries in the Middle East would also want to have one, and before you know it, We have a full-blown problem on our arms. Now, preventing this through decisive actions that we see Trump doing is very important, and it also ensures global security. And last but not the least, the China factor, indirect sabotage of the US dominance. Adding another layer of peril is Iran's deepening ties with China, which indirectly erodes American economic and strategic superiority. China, lacking sufficient domestic energy resources, relies heavily on Iranian oil, importing around 1.38 million barrels per day, making it Tehran's top buyer despite the US sanctions. Now, this trade, often conducted in defiance of international restrictions, props up Iran's economy and funds its malign activities. Beijing's purchases, estimated at over 520 million barrels annually, allow Iran to evade isolation, while China gains discounted fuel to power its industrial might. But the implications run deeper. Iran's oil, lifeline to China, challenges US efforts to contain China's rise. With its vast population and technological prowess, China needs energy to compete globally, and Iran's reserves fill that gap. 90% of Iranian oil is being purchased by China on a daily basis. Okay, now removing the Islamic regime, which is cozy with China and Russia, would disrupt this axis, reinstating US leadership in energy markets and weakening authoritarian alliances. So this is a strategic move to counter not just Iran, but the broader multipolar threats undermining American primacy. Now, it wouldn't shock you to know that I support the United States in flushing out the Islamic regime in Iran. Believe me, I don't sleep well at night knowing that Afghanistan has a nuke, another Islamic state has a nuclear weapon, and I would even sleep less fine if I find out that Iran is able to get their hands on a nuclear weapon. That is my stance on it. So these are the reasons why the US has a vested interest in Iran, and they want to topple or take out the Islamic regime in Iran. And yes, it has nothing to do with Israel. If their motives happen to tally with some of the motives of Israel, then fine. But by no means the number one reason why US is involved is for the betterment of the United States and the United States alone. As always, guys, these are my thoughts and my opinions. Please feel free to share yours in the comment section below, but do so respectfully. Also, if you're not subscribed to this channel, honestly, I don't know what you're waiting for. Subscribe to the channel, like and share this video to keep people informed, and consider joining my membership or supporting the channel in any way that you can. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope to catch you on the next one. For now,